Good morning, everybody, and it sounds like a lot of you already agree with this, so I hope I can keep you on board for the next few minutes and help you to continue to agree that yes, indeed, we should consume ugly or expired foods. And I think we do have a few very good reasons for this, and one of these is this fact. I work for the Food and Agriculture Organization, and the thing we hear every day is that 1 in every 10 people are undernourished or hungry. And while this may seem like a problem that's far away and in other parts of the world, there is a lot of this also in our countries, in developed countries, so it's not only a developing country issue. And the thing about that that's relevant to this is we do actually produce enough food to feed everybody, so this need not be the case. And if we look at some of the facts on food loss and food waste, for example, every year around the globe, around 1.3 billion tons of food is lost or wasted. So that's a third of all food. And if we quickly do the maths, a third of food lost, 10% of the global population without food, it's not difficult to realize that we do indeed have enough food. And this infographic is a couple of years old, so in fact I think that's gone up to 1.6 billion tons of food right now. And I had a picture of fruit and vegetables on the front page, and it wasn't just because it was a nice picture and ugly fruit and veg look pretty. It's much more serious than that. Actually, half of the fruits and vegetables and the roots and tubers that we produce are lost somewhere between primary production and consumption. And while in developing countries, a lot of this is what we call food loss. It happens in the primary production stage. When we come to high-income, middle-income countries, countries like the US, lots of countries in Europe, at least half of this waste happens between retail and consumer. And this is certainly an area where we can all make an impact and make sure that we can reduce this figure. So why are these things, why are they not making it onto our plates? Why do we not see these in our stores? I know my kids love them, but the big retailers or the big stores certainly don't seem to have them on their shelves. And there has been some work done to look into this and see why is this the case. And this is just a case study that was carried out in the UK, but I think a similar situation happens here in the US. And this was one of the big supermarket chains there, and people went around to the farms that supply these supermarket chains to see what actually happens, and in this case it's on carrots, what actually happens with all the carrots that are produced. And all of these carrots go through a grader, and if they're not straight, if they have the slightest bend, they're kicked off the line. Then they go through a second control, and this is a photographic one, and they have to be orange, and if they're not orange, they have some blemishes or some discoloration, there's a little bit of purple or a little bit of other color, they're kicked off. So in this way, something like 25 to 30% of all those carrots never make it out of the grading room. And at least half of these, there is nothing wrong with them, there's just because they don't look pretty. They don't meet what our ideal standards of what a carrot should be like, that we can peel it in one foul sweep and make our lives easy. So is this good enough to get rid of all of these? And we hear a lot about, as we move towards a more mechanized food industry, that it's very important to have conformity. Otherwise the machines can't deal with it, we impact food safety. But I think we have to challenge the industry to say, this is not enough. With limited resources in the world, with a growing global population, we have to be able to make more of the food we produce accessible. And therefore I think that means also pushing our industry to develop the technology so that these kind of less than perfect foods can make it into the food chain in a much more frequent manner, and not just through some of the smaller or local initiatives that are underway to bring these to the table. Now, where I work, we have a lot of focus on food loss and waste, and one of the communication issues that keeps coming up is how do we communicate better to the consumer about these? And so we have this whole series on Zero Hunger Heroes, where we're trying to tell people what to do. And one of those actions that we promote amongst people is don't be prejudiced. Buy ugly or irregularly shaped fruits. And an important point here is that they're just as good for you as the rest. There aren't any nutritional deficits just because they don't look the same. And so there has been a little bit of research to say that even some of these that have weathered a storm, that apples that have a little bit of scab, may even have more antioxidants. But it isn't that they're bad for you or less nutritious for you than the nice straight ones. Now, another area I want to touch on, since it came up on the title, is expiration dates. And there's a lot of dates out there that can go on packaging, and these can be about when it was manufactured, when it was packaged, when it should be sold, when it should be moved off the shelf, when it expires, when it's best before, best quality. And the problem with all these dates is very few of them have anything to do with safety. They're all about quality. And do we really need all this on the packaging? And I think it just adds to a lot of confusion with the consumer. By all means, if there's a date that says this is not safe after that, I fully agree. But most of these have nothing got to do with safety. And we're just telling the consumer that those cookies, which when they open them look perfectly okay, should be thrown out. And I think this is a big challenge. And until we come up with a better way of somehow managing date marking, it's very difficult to tell consumers follow everything on the package, because that just results in a lot of stuff going into landfill and doesn't really have any impact when it comes to consumer health. So again, Zero Hunger Heroes are told to understand dates, but I think they're doing this in a very diplomatic manner, trying to get people to understand these things. But really, is there a role for them unless they're there to tell people about the safety of the food? And I'm not sure there is. And just to finish off, one more point to make to you about the cost of all of this. You know, maybe 10% of our food or something is lost because it's ugly, or because the expiry dates are adhered to. And this is a cost for us, and some surveys in Europe have said, you know, this can cost households up to £1,500 or euros per year. But it also has a cost to the environment. And there was a study done which said if nature was asked to pay the total bill for food waste, it could charge society at least another $700 billion per year. So this is because of greenhouse gas emissions, water loss to irrigation, deforestation, loss of pollinators. So there's a lot of good reasons why we need to get these foods back onto the plate. And I think we all have a role to play. We're consumers, we can put the pressure on, and we've seen what's happened here in the US with antibiotics, for example, and pushing for no antibiotics in chicken. I think we can do the same when it comes to these foods. We have a lot of power. So I hope you will continue to agree that we should continue to consume these ugly and expired foods. And thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much, and I'm delighted to see a good crowd of interested people here today. I'm sure very thoughtful and giving this a good deal of consideration even in your daily lives, because every day at the end of the food chain we rely on food workers and consumers. We ourselves make complex food safety decisions. And this is when the decision is at hand. Do we use something? Do we eat it? Or do we throw it out? And that could be the unsold, bruised produce that is in a nearly empty grocery store bin. It could be that deflated tomato at the back of my refrigerator. The blemished goods found at a food salvage yard. It might be on a special sale. Or the doggy bag of leftovers from last night that is somehow found out on the counter the next day. Or the canned beans that turned up in the basement shelf that maybe have been there 15 years. I think we all sense, food scientists and consumers alike, that there is a connection between quality and safety, between the shape food is in and how risky it is, though we also recognize it's not a direct and simple connection. For example, I worry that bruises and blemishes on fresh produce are portals for pathogen entry. And once the pathogens get inside, they can't be washed off. They can't be dealt with if you're going to eat that produce without cooking. The frequency of bruises is a key part of the quality of the grading system. And I think it has meaning for safety as well. So that means the grading systems we use have a safety element that's built into them. The date on a product for expiry, for best sold by or best used by, is important. Those dates do give the retailer and the consumer a guidepost for what the food producer expects them to do. They are also confusing. As you say, they're very confusing sometimes, and it can be hard to interpret whether they're referring to a quality endpoint or a safety endpoint or both. And of course, for perishable foods, a big concern is not just time, but time and temperature combined, because the food can rapidly spoil or become hazardous if it's left warm. Now, many vaccines that we use in public health need to be kept refrigerated in order to maintain potency. So people delivering vaccines in really warm places like sub-Saharan Africa know all about cold chain monitors to tell them if the vaccine they're about to use is still usable. Similar devices are used to monitor cold chain food shipments during transport. And I wonder if the consumer would be helped if they had access to some of that information, if there were perhaps an expiry date that was mutable, that changed depending on the integrated time and temperature experience of the product. And then there's the food that leaves the restaurant or the grocery store, going to homeless shelters, food banks, or homes, or that goes home with customers in doggy bags. I think it's important to remember that that food is still food and that food safety rules still apply to it. We get some hints of how this works in our outbreak investigations. And here are a few real-world examples. A very large outbreak of shigellosis affected over 800 patrons of 5 related restaurants in New York. The strain of Shigella flexneri that was found in people at each of the 5 restaurants was the same strain, and illness was linked to eating fresh tomatoes. Shortly before the outbreak began, each of those 5 restaurants had received a shipment of special grade tomatoes. These were special because they were hand sorted, they were the overripe ones, they were bruised, and they were available at a special discounted price. No other restaurants got those special grade tomatoes. And they were very likely contaminated somewhere in distribution and could have multiplied, the Shigella could have multiplied easily. Also in 2001, frozen commercial meat chili purchased at a food salvage yard caused 15 cases of botulism after it was served at a church supper after being thawed and gently reheated. And an additional case occurred in another family who also got that salvage yard chili, gently reheated, and ate it even though it appeared spoiled. The salvage yard, it turned out, held a special sale every Saturday of dented cans and old frozen foods displayed at room temperature and then refrozen if they didn't sell. Routine weekday inspections by the health department had missed these sale events. In 2003, in the middle of a large listeria outbreak due to sliced deli meats, most illnesses were in the high-risk populations, the elderly, immunocompromised, or pregnant. One case stood out. A previously healthy young man was hospitalized with a bloodstream infection because he ate a turkey sandwich that had been left in his car for at least a day. These may be extreme examples, but they illustrate the lack of attention and how it can cause trouble. So what do we advise folks to do? Saying, when in doubt, throw it out seems pretty nonspecific. I'd like to think we could help folks make more informed decisions by assessing the quality grades of produce for their safety implications and sending more of the lower quality produce for cooking or other processing. Explore more dynamic, informative labeling, including the possibility of time temperature markers that could be incorporated into consumer packaging, like an expiry date that changes to read discard now. Training those handling leftovers, surpluses, or salvage foods in the principles of food safety. The FDA and some states have guidelines already, and volunteers and workers in this arena need to apply them. And maybe restaurant doggy bags could have some simple instructions printed on them right next to the picture of the pagoda. Instructions to promptly refrigerate, for example. Now, it may seem little has been done in the public health dimension of this problem, but I draw your attention to a recent report in that esteemed scientific journal, The Onion. And I quote, a report published Wednesday by the CDC revealed that saying the phrase, "smells okay," precedes 85% of foodborne illnesses in the United States. Most individuals had given a quick once-over to leftovers and uttered some variation of, "yeah, probably still good." And the report also confirmed that thousands of Americans across the country are infected with a foodborne illness every year shortly after being asked by a friend or family member to try this. So I do think there is risk in poor quality foods, the bad and the bruised, and that the food supply is safer when those risks are recognized and managed. The retailer and the consumer could make better decisions if they had more information than they do now. Thank you very much.
Okay, moving ahead, we're going to have an opportunity for each of the speakers to present a rebuttal. So we'll start with you, Sarah.
I think we've heard some very good examples of problems we have with food and food safety. But what I would like to say is this is not just limited to foods with bruises. Every year we hear of a lot of foodborne diseases associated also with food that's gone through the food chain, that's supposedly gone through all the appropriate checks and balances, and they also cause foodborne disease. So this is not a problem unique to food that's ugly or food that's bruised or blemished. I fully agree that we definitely can do things better, but I think we have to separate our management of food safety from how we manage all these foods that are less than perfect. We cannot say that just because it's perfect, it's not safe. And this is where we need to have a much more refined approach to how we manage risk and how we manage food safety. And we're in danger, I think, with some of our guidance that we give now of letting people immediately associate appearance with risk, and this is the area that we need to address. And this is exactly the problem we have with food waste, that appearances are not everything. And as Rob already said, something can look good and it may not be good, but something can look bad and it may not be bad. So this is something we do have to overcome, and I think this should be our challenge to the industry. There are ways that we can use some of the new tools, the new technology that's coming online to be much more smart about our food and take this to a whole other level. Get the argument away from whether a food is ugly or whether there's a bruise, and try to use the technology that's available to us to address those issues of safety where they're pertinent, not just because they don't look well. I think one other issue is in relation to things like handling. Food handling can be a big issue, and we see that the Cahill outbreak that Rob referred to, there was a lot of handling of those products also involved, and this is something that Cahill is often coming from direct contact with people. So I think what we need to underline here is that when it comes to food, everybody has a role, and we need to also to make it easier for the consumer and those who are handling foods in their homes to manage food safety. Giving them complicated instructions is not always the easiest way for them to address food safety. How can we make this as simple as possible? How can we use the technology that's available to us? And still, how can we get those ugly foods that are still perfectly healthy, can still be used to feed the growing population on the tables and in a safe way. So I hope we will say yes, we should keep them on board and use that as a means to put pressure to find better and smarter ways of doing this. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Dr. Cahill. And I agree, I think, in one thing, that we need to have more clear pathways where foods of various sorts, various categories, various qualities can be routinely put to use without necessarily going to compost. I think that being clear on what those pathways are and being clear that HACCP applies as long as we're going to be consuming them at the end of the pathway is something that probably hasn't gotten as much thought as it needs, and I think we would agree on that. I think ugly is different from bruised and compromised. I think there is a huge variety in what biology and what plants can produce. The exact shape that we sort of have made perfection is something that may be a human construct that we we're a little over fixated on. But bruised and damaged and compromised is different. And I don't want to see that get blended in. And I do see often this mix of quality and or ideal shape versus the actual safety of the food get blended and confused. I think we need to think through the last steps in the food chain. It does not end with purchase or serving. It continues on beyond that. And think hard about what other possibilities there might be. I actually don't think that feeding food to animals is necessarily a waste, not from the animal's point of view. And if we're going to eat those animals, that has a certain efficiency to it actually as well. Now, I do have some sympathy for the idea that a food that is really ready for consumption or could be perfectly good, it's very sad when that doesn't get there. I had the experience recently flying on a very large aircraft returning from Australia, one of those giant double-deckers. It had taken off, it was headed out over the Pacific. On Qantas, they actually feed you, which is an interesting experience for us Americans. And they had just begun preparing the food, and the aromas were wafting through both layers of the cabin when the check engine light came on, and the aircraft had to return, landed at Sydney for emergency oil pump repairs, which mercifully worked. But there were all the food. There was supper that was all fixed and ready and hot. And there was too much warm time on the ground, and the airline elected they had to discard 450 hot dinners ready to serve. That was, and I don't actually know what happened to them, but I am pretty sure nobody ate them. And that was sad. That was particularly sad for us because we took off without recatering and had the aroma of supper to feed us, to feed our imaginations all the way across the Pacific. So I deeply regretted that diversion. And I have a great deal of sympathy for the issue. Thank you.
Okay, and now we'd like to open it up to questions from the audience. So if anyone would like to come forward and ask a question, that'd be great.
It's probably not fair because I'm from CDC, but hopefully you'll allow me a question. So for Dr. Cahill, do you have any statistics, or are you aware of any statistics for the fruits, vegetables, tubers, and roots that actually do go into processing or to animal production versus waste? That'd be an interesting statistic, I mean, disposed of.
I don't have specific statistics, but I would say this very much varies from country to country. So there are some countries where they're set up and if it happens in a grading facility, they're set up whereby they can go into animal feed. However, I would also, and this is variable. From country to country, I would say the statistics on this vary. But I think we also have to have a word of caution for the animal feed side, and having had a lot of discussions on this with the animal feed, we cannot think of that as the only solution for waste. You know, we throw it all in there. There's a whole industry about dealing with food waste in the animal feed side, and in many cases they can deal with that very well because they know how the food is being processed, they know what went wrong, and they know how to manage that and convert that into food waste or into feed for animals. But now with this pressure on finding other people to deal with our food waste, they're getting a lot of mixed foods, and they don't know what the content of that, or there's no trace back on that. So we also have to produce safe feed for the animals. So we have to be careful about thinking, okay, let's put it all into feed, that's the solution. It's a solution for some of it where we know where it's coming from and we can manage any risks for feed, but it's not the solution for everything, and we have to find ways of dealing with that as well.
I guess my concern is messaging. It is, I look at a difference between, like you said, ugly food and spoiled or damaged. And I think about groups who will get the message and who are getting the message about food waste and how it needs to be addressed. But they take it to such a level. The colleges that my kids went to, dumpster diving was considered a virtue, going after food that otherwise, I mean, have a perfectly good cafeteria with plenty of food, but you had students who would go after what they saw as spoiled, as wasted food. So I'm just concerned about how do you get that message out that there's a difference.
Yeah.
Are you familiar with the term dumpster diving?
I've heard of it, yes.
I have a nephew that does it, yes, and he particularly does it after major food recalls.
Oh, right, okay. After
Yes, because suddenly dumpsters may be full.
they're very full, yeah. And we...
I don't think it's a good idea, but I've had trouble talking him out of it.
Yeah. And I think there are... the need for communication in this is really important, and we see a lot of... I think in the US already, I've heard speakers here at previous IAFPs talking about some of the guidance here. And I don't work directly on that, but we're seeing this happening also now in developing countries or lower income countries where, you know, there is a developing food sector and this whole, what they call it, more formally, reuse and redistribution, as it's called. And I think there are people working in that sector as well that recognize food safety. And I know from our side, we have a food safety person working in collaboration with all the other people on the development of that guidance. But communication is going to be the challenge, and to actually reach all of those people who think, you know, they're saving the world just by dumpster diving is a particular challenge, I agree. But hopefully one we can find good communication messages to deal with so that we can reach a balance.
As you said, this looks like a very complex problem. My question is about which will be the best forum to join all the stakeholders involved in the solution of the problem. Who will be having the leadership to look for the solution of this problem? And how could we have a systematic approach to the solution?
Well, I think, let me try answering, but I think Dr. Cahill probably spends a good deal of time on this professionally as well. I think in this country, it's something that's being considered and discussed in county health departments, in state health departments, and with food safety authorities at all levels. It's tied to the local food and the free food movements, so there are a lot of moving parts in it. And I think our best solutions come from local and state health department approaches and the Association of Food and Drug Officials in this country, who are attempting to bring some dialogue together. There are a lot of stakeholders, and I welcome that dialogue, but I think in our setting it needs to come up organically from local and state levels.
Yeah, I would say to complement that, globally we have this dialogue as well. There's an initiative called Save Food, which is a consortium of over 850 different industries, non-governmental organizations, retailers, and governments who are working together to try and find technical solutions to this. So, and look at where the technology can bring us, what kind of practices can be put in place to try and address this. So I fully agree it has to be a kind of a multi-stakeholder effort to do this. And but you know, at the end, the food industry also boils down to economics, and we have to find a feasible way of doing this. And in a presentation earlier this week, I heard somebody from the industry say, if you tell us grow chicken on the moon, we can do it. So we need to, you know, I think, be very strong in our communication to the industry that we need to find a way to do this. And at the end, this is where the technology that will allow us to do this comes from. But the others, the regulators, the health departments, the consumers have a role in informing and pushing that this is this is the direction we want to go.
Thank you.
Okay, let's thank our first two speakers this morning for a really, you know, well-rounded perspective on the first question. Thank you very much.
Now we see.